Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another GameTech.com video, and this time we have some information on Valve's Steambox, which of course marks their first foray into the console industry. Gabe Newell has announced that the Steambox itself will be starting to go into prototype and be ready for prototype, shall I say, within the next 4 months. There are some issues with it apparently, and at the moment they are mostly heat related, along of course with noise. Now I've mentioned this a few times in previous videos, mostly concerning the Xbox 720 and PS4. The problem is, once you start getting a really powerful device in a fairly closed environment, a fairly small enclosed environment, you start to have heat and noise issues. Why noise? Because obviously you're trying to cool the thing, and generally speaking the cheapest and easiest way to cool things is through fans, in other words air. Of course, you could do it other ways as well, such as H2O, in other words, water cooling, but it's not generally speaking going to be feasible for a console. Anyway, I digress a little bit. There are a few other issues right now that Gabe's looking at, and that includes actually adding a body sensors to you. So they could actually develop software to adapt to that. In other words, for example, let's say a Left 4 Dead, Newell said you need to actually be able to directly measure how aroused the player is, what their heart rate is, things like that, in order to offer them a new experience each time they play. In other words, the more scared you are, the game will respond in kind. On the other hand, if you're not really that terrified, or you don't really feel that your pulse is pounding, the game will start, throwing things at you. That's not a quote, that's me surmising. Meanwhile, Microsoft's boss is saying that he doesn't believe Valve is a competitor, at least a main competitor, and he's saying that Sony, Nintendo, Apple, and indeed even Google are. His Don Matrick said that he doesn't believe they're a major threat. And indeed, it wasn't long ago that Phil Harrison actually issued a warning to Valve, saying that, well, you know what, the console industry isn't exactly easy to really crack and get into. And that's true. After all, if you're a new hardware entrant, in other words, you're just kind of getting into the market for the first time, you've not really that experience, it's very hard to please the customers, to get all the hardware distribution right the first time. In other words, making sure you've got enough units out to make sure that you're able to please the developers who are going to be working on the console and so on. Many people of course are going to say that the Steambox is going to be a PC in a, well, smaller box, and he's right of course. The Steambox has had numerous specifications leaked about it, and right now we're not really sure what it's going to entail. We do know, however, that it's likely to cost more than the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox 720, because Gabe is going for a more feature-rich spec. Of course, most of this at the moment is pure speculation. Valve haven't gone on record and said, hey, you know what, here's the memory, here's the CPU, here's the graphics card in our system, and it's coming with this, this, and this. We're still not exactly sure. Another point, of course, to think about right now is there are going to be a lot of successes and new failures. Don't forget that for a while in the console industry, and I use for a while in a very loose term, if you look, for example, in the 70s and 80s and even the 90s to a degree, there were actually quite a few smaller releases for hardware for consoles. In other words, a smaller manufacturer or a manufacturer may produce a game, for example, the Philips with their CDI and so forth, would release a console and it may or may not be successful. And then afterwards, they may re-enter the market for another one, or they may just give up there and then. Recently, however, it's not really been like that. If you were to say look in the PlayStation 2 days, you had, of course, the PS2, the Dreamcast, the original Xbox, and, of course, the Nintendo GameCube. There wasn't really anything else. Of course, the PC doesn't count in this particular console market. So what I'm trying to say is that, in essence, it's been, well, especially with the PS3, Xbox 360, and the Nintendo Wii, it's been a very three-horse race. You've not really had to worry about anything more. Now it's not like that. Many people are concerned, and by many people I mean many hardware manufacturers are worried that, say, Apple may get into the hardware market, and of course Google, and then of course you've got smaller Android devices as well, such as, say, the Game Stick, that all threaten to kind of chip into the market, and a lot of these are experiments. A couple of them, of course, are being started on Kickstarter. Others are being started by big companies, for example, Valve and Microsoft with Xbox 720, PlayStation 4, of course, from Sony. And while those companies are still established, ultimately they still have to win the consumer's hard-earned cash. And Valve, of course, are going to be making a few gambles here. I'm going to probably release an entire new video to really go into their, into their strategies, but it's probably going to be later on. I'm going to be following the Steambox quite closely, I think, especially since, of course, if you look at the later versions of Steam now, they do actually have quite good support, actually, for turning your PC into a pretty good, decent console system for the living room. In other words, Steam, of course, does support controllers if you were to use that particular mode. Regardless of which, it's going to be an extremely interesting time this year. I think all of this year, from now basically until maybe even early to mid 2014, is going to really heat up. After all, we know that PlayStation 4 isn't going to be released until near the end of this year, and even if, let's say, the Xbox 720 is released at the same time, and of course, this continues, the fact of the matter is, it's going to take a while for the market to really adjust to so many different consoles on the market, and you've got to bear in mind as well that a lot of people are going to be slow on the uptake. In other words, it could take 6, 12, or even 24 months before people are really ready to buy the next console. Especially if you're a PC gamer, it can be even more difficult. Regardless of which, I think that just about covers it in this particular video. So hopefully you've enjoyed it, and I will see you around soon. Take care of yourselves, and bye for now.